Okay, we will go ahead and get started. Good morning. Thank you all for being here today. We are excited to be kicking off another year of chapter programs, and we've got a great one lined up for today. But before we get started, just a few quick announcements. First of all, before I forget, when you came in today, you should have received a parking ticket at the in the parking garage. Please pass those to your right. Leo over here will be collecting those, and we'll be sure to get those validated before everyone leaves today. Some quick announcements on some upcoming events. First of all, we are thrilled to be holding on Thursday and Friday, March 9th and 10th, a program in Savannah. This program will consist of a cocktail networking social the night of March 10th, held at the Cotton Sale Hotel in downtown Savannah, followed by a program the morning of March 10th, presented by the local economic development authorities, concluding with a tour of the Savannah Port. This will be a very informative meeting that will focus on the economic impact of the Savannah Port on the state of Georgia and the entire Southeast region. And it will be a great opportunity for CCIMs across the state to network with one another. We do have limited capacity for this event, so I do encourage you to go onto our website and register as soon as possible. More information on this has also been going out via our email blast. But if you have any further questions, please see me or our chapter administrator, Kelly Mills. For the months of April and May, we'll be holding some chapter networking happy hours with our 101 and 104 students as the guests of honor. And we'll be having more information forthcoming on those very soon. Also in May, we are in the planning stages for another exciting program. We anticipate this being a program that will focus on one of the newer sports venues in Atlanta, and we'll have more information forthcoming on that very soon. On the education side, we will be hosting 5 classes to be held in Atlanta this year. Our first 101 class will be held April 17th to the 20th. This will be followed by a 104 class May 8th through the 11th. We will have a second 101 class that will be held August 21st to the 24th, and a 102 class that will be held September 11th through the 14th. We'll wrap up with a 103 class held November 6th through the 9th. So please spread the word on that to your colleagues and employees. Lastly, I would like to recognize each and every one of our sponsors for the year. Bull Realty, Grand Bridge Real Estate Capital, BB&T, Kitchens Kelly Gaines, Marcus and Millichap, The Good Group, The Simpson Company, Warren Averett, MG Valuation, Strategic 1031 Exchange Advisors, Wyndham Branham, Adams Commercial Real Estate, Commercial Experts, First Colony Financial Corporation, National Property Inspections, Renaissance Bank, Standard Landscape, Stout, Kaiser, Madison, Peak, and Hendrick, Richard Bowers and Company, and Excelligent. And with that, we will go ahead and get started with today's program. Our host today really needs no introduction to our chapter. Michael Bull, CCIM, has been a longtime supporter of the chapter and is the founder of and managing broker at Bull Realty, Inc., a commercial real estate sales, leasing, and advisory firm headquartered here in Atlanta. Michael is also host of America's Commercial Real Estate Show, a weekly talk radio show about business and commercial real estate related issues. New shows are broadcast every week, available on demand at iTunes and on the show's website. Shows are also broadcast on 12 radio stations around the country, including 1190 WAFS at 10 a.m. every Saturday here in Atlanta. Let's all give a warm welcome to Mr. Michael Bull.
That's your seat, yeah. Well, good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Morning. Can you hear me now? Yes. Are your mics on? Is my mic on?
Test.
Hello?
Right.
I guess so. Can you hear me? Yeah.
I'm on. I will be on in a second. Well, good morning, CCIM. Now you can hear me, right? I'm really pleased to be here with the CCIM group, most respected group of commercial real estate people in the world, right? Oh, here we go. Glad to be here. And we have a great panel today. We're going to talk about industrial real estate, and we're going to talk about office real estate. We're going to focus on the Atlanta market. And I'd like to get input from you guys. If you have a question, you can text me the question. I'll give you a number. You can text it to me. And if there'll be a prize for the best question. And the worst question, well, that's just embarrassing, right? So if you want to text me a question, it's 404-668-6502. 404-668-6502. All right. Can you hear me now? I don't know anything about showbiz. Is the other mic work?
Yeah, there's one. Use one of theirs and
Let me use it. All right, here we go. All right, first of all, let me introduce Jim Bacchetta with Highwoods. He's a VP there. He oversees the Southeast, and they have really nice office buildings all around the Southeast, especially around Atlanta. And then we have Larry Callahan. He's CEO of Patillo, and Patillo owns tons of land and industrial buildings. They also have a development. They also have a construction company that separated those companies. And you've probably heard them, hopefully, on the Commercial Real Estate Show, so they know what they're talking about. Now, we have some slides that are going to be running up here to give you some numbers on 2016. Of the office and industrial market, but instead of boring you with numbers, I thought we'd talk to the professionals here on the line here, talking to tenants and seeing what's happening in their market every day. And my first question for you guys is, you're dealing with tenants every day. You're dealing with prospective tenants. You're dealing with new tenants. And have you seen anything different with what they're saying or what they're doing since the election? And are you guys forecasting or doing anything different since the election? And Jim, if we can start with you.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks. It's an honor to speak in front of this distinguished group, and I tell all young people to go after the CCIM because it's an instant credibility, a great credential, and if I weren't so old, I'd probably get one myself. But I burned out with the CPA exam, and that was enough for me. What has changed, I think, is just a kind of a broader sense of optimism. Tax credits or tax rate reductions are surely coming, which will provide more capital for investment, less regulation. I mean, it's clearly going to be a more business-friendly environment. And so I can't really think of any specific example of comments from tenants or prospects, but my sense is that people, Donald Trump is very pro-business, and he's He's got a thin skin and he says crazy things. But he's a real estate developer, so what better kind of a guy to have in the White House solving some of our problems than a successful real estate developer who understands business. And so my sense from just anecdotal evidence and comments is a greater sense of optimism, and we feel that this very slow and sort of muted recovery since 2011 or 12 will extend a little bit further and maybe pick up steam. But a recession is looming out there. But I think we're generally less concerned about a recession in the next year or two, or maybe even 3.
Larry?
Good comments. Thank you. The election that we just saw, in terms of the contrast between what might have been and what actually is the new set of policies by the administration, is about as significant as any that I've seen. And when there's periods of great change, you can get a mood of fear, or you can get a burst of optimism. It is not our job as business people to project our own personal feelings about who you wanted. It's our job, once you have a change, and a significant change, to figure out what that environment's going to be like and figure out how to succeed and prosper in that environment. We've got a significant change, and I stayed up all night the night of the election and watched that whole thing, and watched the stock market and futures drop 400 or 500 points, 1,000 points, and then within a day it had all recovered and it started going in the other direction. So the world started adjusting that fast to what's going to be different. I agree with Jim in terms of what is likely to happen. If you have an administration that is going to cut taxes, reduce regulation, and attempt to do massive infrastructure projects, those things are likely to be stimulative, and they're likely to extend the run of this current cycle. How long they go and what other things may happen that might interrupt it, we don't know, but the policies that have been talked about, if they're implemented, are likely to extend. And that is noteworthy because we are fairly late into a cycle at this point in terms of historic runs. And there were a lot of talk, if you listen to all the people talking and projections that have been done in recent years, they were all saying, well, we got, get your deals done by 17 because you're likely to see a downturn in 18. Well, the things that are being talked about, like tax reform, are going to take a while before they can get done. You can't tweet a new tax code, okay? And the same is due with restructuring of the healthcare system. That's going to take a while to do. Same with infrastructure. Saying that we're going to do $100 billion worth of additional infrastructure, that can be very good for an economy if they're concentrating on bridges and roads and things like that. But if you start doing that, it doesn't happen instantaneously. I mean, think of any project, the environmental work that's got to be done in the background, the planning, everything else. So the time that all these type of stimulus activities might hit is around the time that everybody was saying things were going to turn down. So I agree with Jim in terms of what is the likely effect on the economy, not on people's emotions and everything else, but the likely effect on the economy if these things are done, and they're likely to get done because he has a Congress of the same party. So I think you're likely to see a stimulus in this run continue for a little while longer.
Well, while we're on this subject, of the things that Trump says he's going to do, repatriation, infrastructure, reduction in tax rates, what of these things are going to be most significant to your sector, Jim? I mean, office market, you guys love jobs, right? So if there's a reduction in corporate tax rates, if there's repatriation, if there's more money to spend, are there more jobs? Are you doing the Snoopy dance on the office market?
Not quite doing the Snoopy dance yet, but yeah, we're clearly optimistic. I think we don't expect the big established Fortune 1000, Fortune 5000 companies to expect a surge of new hiring from them. I mean, historically, modern times, the last few decades, the vast majority of new jobs have been created by small business. And so there will be probably some good job growth coming from the big guys, but most of the new jobs come from small business. The vast majority do. So if the environment is healthy for entrepreneurs, and Atlanta has been a terrific city for incubation, this is what drives most of the jobs. And you read about the big corporate relos and Mercedes-Benz and all the terrific companies that have chosen to come to Atlanta out of the Northeast and the Midwest, and that will continue. But 78 or 70,000 or so jobs have been created here the last 4 or 5 years. Maybe 20% of those about 20% of those are office space absorbing jobs. So we figure 15,000 office space absorbing jobs each of the last 4 or 5 years, and that's been terrific for us. Vacancy has gone from 17% down to 12%. If you look at the CoStar numbers, everybody's got different sources of numbers, but basically we've reduced vacancy 1% per year each of the last 4 or 5 years, but those 15,000 or so jobs each year that have absorbed office space have come mostly from small or medium-sized businesses. And you can count up the jobs that came with Mercedes-Benz, a few hundred. The other guys, have brought in, several hundred. The big corporate relos, and all that's great. It's great prestige. It's great. It shows everyone that you should consider Atlanta to grow your business, to start your business, to relocate your corporate headquarters. But it's not where the bulk of the jobs come from. They're coming from small business. But Atlanta's always been a terrific incubation city. I've been here 35 years and seen it and experienced it. And it's going to continue. All the great factors that drive business to Atlanta are still here. You read about, Atlanta ranks number 8th worst in traffic. Well, yeah, you can have an hour and a half commute if you want to own 4 acres way up Georgia 400 and work in Buckhead, but you don't have to. There are affordable housing alternatives for everyone. So that's the only bad knock we get, and I think it's undeserved. The bottom line is, with as Larry said, deregulation, reduced tax rates, the infrastructure construction, all of these things are going to continue to sustain very favorable conditions in Atlanta for the small businesses and the medium-sized businesses, and I think we'll continue to see the 60 or 70,000 new jobs in Atlanta for the next few years. That's what we expect, and so we'll go from a little bit under 12% vacancy in the office sector. I expect us to be in the high single digits before it's all over, and when the Wall Street analysts come down and visit with us, because we're a public company, and they ask me these questions, that's what I tell them. That's what I believe, and so I'm very optimistic about the next few years in Atlanta.
Single-digit vacancy. That sounds like the Snoopy dance.
9.9.
Well, Larry, if more jobs, lower tax rates possibly for individuals means more money with consumers, and we're Americans, right? So we're going to spend it. So what does that mean for the industrial market with online sales potentially increasing?
Well, the industrial market is actually doing very well in just about every measure, especially if you're focused on the Atlanta market. These are the best of times, and we've had 19 straight quarters of positive net absorption. We've got the most new construction going on that we've had any time in more than a decade. In fact, they're all-time levels. In fact, it's been all-time levels for the last 3 years. So, it's really good times. The demand is really, really strong. So we're in a good position. But to get to Michael's question, one of the drivers why industrial is doing so well is e-commerce. The sales, the online sales, rose 11% last year. Same store sales in department stores declined 6% during that same year. So there's clearly a movement out of the traditional chains into e-commerce. And where does e-commerce actually handle their product? They don't handle it in the mall, they handle it in industrial buildings. And there is a huge transfer of activity from the malls into warehouses. And it's a big driver of activity. Amazon themselves, during the downturn, while everybody was sitting around twiddling their thumbs wondering what to do next, Amazon was building million square foot buildings one after another all over the country. They built 60 or 70 of them. So, and they weren't the only ones doing it. People like Home Depot were doing it too. So there's not, Amazon is the biggest, but they're not the only one that's in e-commerce. And they are gravitating toward these big buildings. The more sales that keep happening in e-commerce, and it's likely to continue just like it has been, the more that happens, the stronger underpinning we've got for industrial activity. So I see that as being a driver that's going to be one of the things that keeps industrial strong. In fact, there's a case to be made that when there is a downturn in the economy, there may continue to be activity that's driving industrial forward as we move into figuring out how to deliver something. If you order something this morning, when do you really want it to be delivered? And the answer is probably this afternoon. And they're trying to figure out how to do that. And that's the next big wave of activity in industrial. They've built, in fact, there's a pattern that has been developing for a while here where companies like Amazon will come into a new market. They did this in Chattanooga and announced that they were going to build a 1 million square foot building, and everybody in Chattanooga was thrilled. And then a few months later, they announced they're going to build another one in Chattanooga, about 20 miles away. So 2 of them. And we've seen this also in other markets where they come in and they build 2 of them. So that's been huge, and everybody's been focused on that. And that's been the most active part of industrial, has been the really huge buildings. The next thing is those huge buildings are regional in focus, but if you really want to be able to deliver something that you order today, you need to have that thing stationed relatively close to the people that are going to be using it. And that's going to call for a number of satellite locations rather than 1 million square foot buildings. So that's the next big thing that's happening.
And Larry, what size are those buildings typically? Where do they range, and how much land do you need for those buildings, and how close do they need to be to the major cities?
Well, it's an interesting question, and it's really, everybody's been talking about it for years. It's just now really actually starting to happen, and what we're seeing is requests for an actual occupancy of buildings in the 200,000 to 300,000 square foot range. So, that 200,000 square feet is 4 or 5 football fields under roof, so it's a fairly large building. It's not a 1 million square foot building, but that's kind of where it's dropped down to. And there is a premium on being close to airports. That's one thing because of all the activity coming in and out to the e-commerce where it's being shipped overnight. So airports are one of the places where there's a lot of activity, and just close in. Industrial has a history of going to the perimeter, moving as far away from the center of a city, going out to farmland. But these type of activities are putting a premium on being close in. So those of you that represent pieces of land that are distressed, strip centers that have gone under, those are candidates to be converted to industrial buildings for e-commerce delivery.
But they need to be fairly large sites, right?
Fairly large sites. I mean, if you talk about a 200,000 square foot building in these contexts, you probably need 20 to 25 acres. And the acres that are associated with it, a lot of these strip centers were only 10 acres, and that doesn't quite get it. But if you get a 25 or more acre site, there's real potential for conversion if those things happen to be close in and capable of serving e-commerce needs.
Okay, and I'm out again, right? The mic's out again? Jim, let's talk about the office market a little bit. It seems like a lot of tenants are trying to squeeze more people into less space. And I was wondering, how are you seeing that working for these tenants? Is it still happening, or is there some pushback on some of these tenants with wellness and productivity to actually use more space?
There are some pretty significant trends in the office world, and it gives us anxiety and stress, and it's mostly driven by the millennial generation. I'm a baby boomer, and we probably have a good number of boomers and Gen Xers here. The millennial generation is about 75 million people, age 18 to 35. The next generation is Gen X, and they're age 35 to 50. Boomers are 51 to 69. So that the two biggest groups are the millennials and the boomers, both about 75 million. Boomers are starting to retire, actually had already started to retire, and in 3 years, millennials will comprise 46% of the workforce. It's pretty hard to ignore the millennial generation. How many millennials do we have out here? Not too many. You guys are the reason for my anxiety and stress. Do we have any Patriot fans out here? I don't really know who to hate. I don't see any. But just all kidding aside, the millennials are demanding things that we haven't seen in the past, and this can be good, and it can be bad. One of the statistics I read recently was, make sure I get this right, 55% of the time, the average office employee's space is vacant. In other words, they're not in their space. So we're using our office space less. The millennial generation is driving that, and employers are picking up on the fact that they don't need as big a space for their employees. They need amenities to attract the millennials and retain them, but they're packing more people in per square foot, and so that scares us, of course, because we like to see 3 or 4 per 1,000 square feet, and we're getting RFPs for 5, 6, 7 per 1,000 square feet, and a generous factor of for collaborative areas and lounges and that sort of thing, which helps to compensate a little bit on the square footage side from a landlord's perspective. But it's still, the employers want to be a lot more dense in terms of people per square feet, and so we look ahead and we say, what's this really mean? What is going to happen, to vacancy and even with job growth? If we pack more and more people in per square foot, that's not so good for landlords. There are constraints that will serve to limit this densification. Biggest one is parking. Like in Buckhead, for example, we have 2 million feet in Buckhead. The zoning for parking is 2.5 spaces per 1,000. So you cannot build more than 2.5 spaces per 1,000 square feet, and that obviously limits the density that you can put in, unless you're on a MARTA rail station, because the MARTA rail station will enable the millennials and others to get to your building without a car. There are other things that are very confusing to me. I don't understand quite how driverless cars are going to manage to be safe on the highways, but all the experts say they're coming. And they're saying that more and more people are going to be in driverless vehicles. Well, they aren't going to need a parking space. In fact, there are some experts who are saying all these big parking decks everywhere are going to be obsolete because of the driverless vehicles. So we're going to have to convert them to mini storage or something. So there are a lot of trends. Some of it's just very hard to figure out because they're opposing in their effect. I'm not smart enough to figure all this out, but we are trying to acquire buildings on rail, on MARTA rail stations, and the 4 that we acquired, Monarch Center and Alliance Center, are right on a MARTA rail station. So that helps alleviate the anxiety and stress that the millennials are putting on me, because I know we can put more density in those buildings if we have to, and you know, we have the advantage of being on the rail station. But you know, we're doing some neat things. I mean, if you haven't been to Michael Bull's office, he's done some really cool stuff in his lobby. It's a very contemporary, fun place to be. TVs everywhere. He's got high tables and bar stools, and it feels good. And that's kind of a prototypical millennial appealing sort of amenity. So if you get a chance to drop by his office sometime and just poke your head in there, he did that a few years ago, and it looks like he did it yesterday. We're putting fitness centers in. We're putting training rooms, not little conference rooms where you can seat 12 people, but big training rooms like this one, even bigger, so that our tenants can benefit from them. And you know, it costs money, but you know, we're doing things like that to appeal to the employers who are trying to appeal to the millennials.
Jim, you mentioned more people and less square footage. What are some things that we should think about if we run a company, we're a tenant rep, or we rep a landlord, or own an office building? What are some of the major concerns about more people and less space? You mentioned parking. What about HVAC? What about the other capacities of the building should we think about?
Well, you know, you get into issues with the fire marshal pretty quickly when you increase density. So you're up against those kinds of limits, and obviously mechanical capacity has to be considerably more with that sort of density. There are limits, physical limits to what you'll be able to achieve in terms of density, and I think that you know, it gets more expensive, obviously, to upfit these buildings. Extra mechanical equipment is expensive, and then you get into additional corridor costs because you've got to have, you know, fire marshal in every municipality can give us fits when you start to go for that, you know, higher density.
Can I mention one thing? I know we're industrial guys, but we're actually building a new headquarters for our company, and we're building it in Chamblee. And where we're building it is on a MARTA parking lot. So, you know, we're right in tune with what you're saying, and we're doing it for the millennial generation. We figure as we go through the next 20, 30 years, that's where you want to be, is right on a MARTA line.
Yeah, and you mentioned our office. We're in a Highwoods building. They're a good landlord. If you're looking for a good landlord, put some tenants in. And we do have a big coffee shop that faces a television and radio studio when you come in, and there's a game room with a lot of glass that's all soundproofed. And so I think it is what the kind of things that tenants are looking for today, those kind of we spaces, right? And Larry, on the industrial buildings, the industrial real estate market's really changing. I guess your buildings and your sites are kind of morphing as we speak, right?
Well, the shorthand strategy that you know we've been talking about among our group is that we want to grow taller and younger, and that's, you know, I mean, something I've always wanted to do, and our company actually can do. So you can do that with a company, and we've been very actively doing it. We let go of a lot of our more mature properties, we'll put them that way, that we had owned for a long time. And we sold about 6 million square feet of buildings in about a 1.5-year time frame, most of it in one single transaction. But yeah, there's a significant change, and we were just reflecting that with our strategy, letting go of some of the things that we built in the 60s and 70s, and then moving on to much bigger buildings. Industrial has become much taller. Kind of 30-foot clear height is kind of the minimum for the more modern buildings. And there were many of them for a long time that were built. There were 18, 20, 24. So we're pushing more and more into 30-foot or taller buildings. And then the footprint has gotten much bigger. The average building built in the United States over the last 5, 6, 7 years have been over 200,000 square feet. The average industrial building in Atlanta, and people focus on all these million square foot buildings, the average industrial building in Atlanta is still about 45,000 square feet. So there's a huge shift. All the new stuff is 1 million square feet or more. All of our speculative activity is in these much larger buildings. And then the buildings themselves, especially if they're going to be oriented toward e-commerce, have got to have a lot more parking than they ever did before. So the demand for land, those of you that do land type activity, you'll just notice that industrial people are looking for bigger and bigger footprints because of the fact that that they need parking for trucks. And again, an e-commerce building that would be, say, 500,000 square feet, if that was the traditional warehouse distribution building, that might have 50, maybe on the high end, maybe 100 people working in it. But if that's an e-commerce building, it could easily have 500 or 600 people working in there. It's a very different world than what it was, and that makes a lot more need for parking.
If you will, talk to us about your missions for 2017 of your firms and some possibilities that CCIMs might be able to do business with you guys. Jim?
I mentioned earlier, for me personally, a big thing that I'm focused on is we have some vacancy in our Buckhead buildings that was, one was caused a few months ago by 3 floors that exercised an early termination right because they were acquired by a larger company, pulling some of them into a central perimeter headquarters. So that's a big focus of mine. Morgan Stanley's lease was up in our Monarch Tower building, is up this summer as well, and that's roughly 60,000 square feet. So we've got some good sized blocks available in those 2 buildings, and if anybody wants to get paid a big commission, bring us a deal. We pay within 5 days, by the way, of the deal being inked, and that's one of the things we do to attract tenant rep brokers, and so that's, to answer your question, that's one way you can do business with Highwoods.
How about acquisitions? You guys do more development or acquisitions?
Well, we're always in the market for any Class A office building. We're probably chasing it, and we're in the hunt, and typically we're not always winning, obviously. In fact, we lose a lot more than we win because we're very focused. We've been 500,000 square foot buildings in Atlanta in the last 5 years, starting with the Buckhead office buildings, are 4 of them, and Riverwood 100, which is a 500,000 square foot building in the Cumberland Galleria office, and you're in there, underwriting, and I think of all the buildings that we've acquired in the last 5 years, we've probably missed 15 or 20 because it's so competitive, and cap rates. You never know where cap rates are going, so you're sharpening your pencil and you're wondering, all right, is this a good cap rate? Is it going to stay this way, or is it going, or cap rates on the rise? Are we paying too much? But Michael, to answer your question, we're in the hunt there. Unfortunately, I read a statistic recently. 50% of the Class A office buildings in Atlanta have changed ownership in the last 3 years. Most of the buyers are like us, long-term hold institutional investors. So there aren't going to be that many available. But the ones that do become available, we'll be chasing them. And honestly, we just had a quarterly earnings call yesterday, and our guidance to Wall Street was that we would invest 100 to 200 million in new office buildings this year. That's a skinny little number. So we're not. I don't want to say we're pessimistic. We're just realistic that there probably aren't going to be a lot of great opportunities for acquisition. Now, we are always chasing development opportunities on the office side, just like Larry's chasing them on the industrial side. They're very competitive, and we were successful a year ago with Riverwood 200, a 300,000 square footer that is 73% pre-leased, and that's under construction now, and it'll be delivered this summer. And But that's about the extent of our development activity and in Atlanta anyway, and acquisition activity right now.
And Larry, I want to get to ways we can do business with you guys and what your missions are for 2017. But before we do that, you brought up interest rates rising and potential cap rate changes in the future. So I want to get your opinion of, I know you guys are both really long hold kind of investors and developers and companies, but what would you expect for an exit cap rate if you were talking to someone about something 5 years from now? We're CCIMs, right? We're running numbers. We're trying to decide what values are going to be at exit, or when we need to refinance a property in 5 years. Opinion?
Well, it will be an opinion, and this is more art than science, because the truth is none of us know what cap rates are going to be 5 years from now. I think most of us think it will be higher because we are probably going to be in an environment, if in fact we have stimulated the economy and we've in fact cut tax rates, and if you just think about how governments run, if they do more spending and they reduce taxes, there's a burst of happiness and everybody's pleased, but the government itself actually runs a deficit. And as it increases its deficit, that actually is one more thing that puts inflationary pressures and interest rate tending to go up. So I think you're likely to see interest rates. I think that's way more likely than that they'll stay the same or go down. So I think we're going to see a rising interest rate environment and probably rising inflation. Both of those things are fairly likely. Then what is the impact of that on cap rates? I actually heard a pretty good analysis on Michael Bull's radio show not too many, maybe a month or two ago, where they were talking about this. The general expectation is that as interest rates start going up, they could probably go up a full % or so before you're going to start seeing cap rates start to do the same thing. Now, because the demand is so strong for the product right now. But at some point, as interest rates go up to 3, 4%, you're probably going to see increases in cap rates also. So if we look out 3, 4, 5 years, when we're looking at and making investments and assuming what the cap rate's going to be, we usually assume that the cap rate will be higher when we look out, higher than it is today. And generally speaking, we assume a % or so. But the further out you go, the less certain that is, and the more likely it is that it's going to be more than that.
So if you guess for 5 years from now, you were selling an industrial building or valuing an industrial building, what cap rate might you put on it?
I would guess around 7.
Okay. And that's a property that might sell for 5 right now, or?
I would say more 5.5 to 6.
Okay.
I mean, what people focus on is always the extremes of everything. So the lowest cap rate you've ever heard is the one that kind of fixes in your mind. But that deal was a really special deal. You know, that was like the ultimate. And most of the deals that actually happen aren't quite as perfect as that deal. That was probably a 15-year commitment on a brand new building that was just state of the art with the greatest tenant that you ever heard of. There are cap rates right now for industrial buildings out in California, and you'll hear about them because they make national news. 4%. You hear somebody say, "Well, I heard one that was 3.5." Yeah, when you're an investor, if that's the best deal you can get, what you do is you start looking around the rest of the country, trying to find yield somewhere else. Exactly.
Jim, opinion?
Very articulate, Larry. I agree with everything. Experiencing historical lows in interest rates, and there's really no place for interest rates to go but up. And the factors that Larry just talked about, well, in my opinion, I have a strong opinion, just an opinion, but I just don't see how interest rates do anything but move north, and cap rates will follow. And typically, because the industrial buildings are simpler, less risk, they have lower cap rates than office buildings that have so much going on and so much risk. And we will probably always see a lower cap rate for the very best industrial buildings than the very best office buildings. But I would expect cap rates on the office buildings to move 1% over the next 5 years, maybe more. Maybe it's the 7 cap that he's going to see on an industrial building will be a 7.5 or an 8 cap on an office building. That's just my gut feel. But with interest rates, I mean, we've been very spoiled by these low interest rates, and it can't be sustained with $20 trillion in outstanding government T-bills that have to be refinanced every weekly, monthly, 6 months, 1 year, and most of them are short-term paper, and so that's constantly going on behind the scenes, and with inflation likely coming, deficits seem to be a thing that are never going to go away. Government spending deficits, growing volume of government debt, and an economy heating up because of tax rate reductions. I don't see interest rates staying this low for long, and hopefully they won't see them get up to historic norms, because if they get up to the 6% range, which is more or less a historic norm, and they were really going to have a big government deficit problem, and it's just going to get ugly real fast.
From the CCIMs, but how can we do business with you, Larry? I know you're getting younger and taller. What else?
Well, we've got a speculative building up in Jackson County in the Jefferson area that's 450,000 square feet. We just finished it. It's been in play for e-commerce type companies. Great building, and we don't have a tenant for it yet, so there's an opportunity. One of our mantras also, we own thousands of acres of land, and one of our mantras has been convert the dirt. So we can convert the dirt in a lot of different ways, and among them are we build a spec building on them, or we do a build to suit for somebody. The other possibility is somebody comes to us and says, hey, we've got somebody who would like to build on your land, and they've got their own construction company, and they've been using them all over the country. Well, we've actually had situations where we'll sell land, and that is a significant change for our organization, because we used to have our own construction company, and we thought of land as our #1 marketing tool for our construction company. But we've separated from our construction company, and now that opens us up to thinking more like real estate investors, and there are situations where we will actually sell a piece of land for somebody who's doing a build-to-suit.
Okay, I'd like to open it up to questions from the CCIMs, because I could ask some questions all day. Impact of free trade?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I've heard a lot of people talking about just that. It was what happens. Well, if you talk to, just separate off economists and have them talk about that, they'll say, okay, well, if you start a trade war, what is historically happened is the other people start putting tariffs on our things too, and then there's a net reduction in international activity. So that is a concern. Should there actually be a trade war? There is, if you subscribe to the possibility that that position is an element of brilliance, standing around saying that you might put up a tariff actually causes certain activity that can be very positive. One thing it does is a lot of international players say, we've got to be able to sell into that market. One thing we might do, Willie, let's come over there before there's any kind of tariff put in place and put in more new investment and manufacture here in the United States. If the tariffs are actually put in place, that's a different game, because that has historically, for those of you who are historians and know a thing called the Smoot-Hawley tariff, was one of the things that pushed problems into really difficult situation called the Great Depression. So who knows how far that will go. If it's a lot of rattling swords and encouraging people to invest here and encouraging people to come in, that may be very positive. If significant tariffs are put in place covering broad swaths of the economy, the likely result would be negative, in my opinion.
Question back?
Jim, you talked about office space around water lines. Up in Gwinnett, they're talking about doing some rapid rust systems because of the expense of the water. Would you see office space going around
question is new development around new MARTA stations.
Great question. I think it could help. It certainly could help. You sort of get catering and thinking about these millennials all the time. We sort of get a sense that they really are probably not going to be attracted to Gwinnett for the near term. I mean, they want to be on MARTA Rail. They want to be down in Midtown. They want to be in Buckhead. They're young and they're single, and they want some nightlife, and they want the restaurants. They don't want to get in their car. A lot of them, amazingly, do not own cars. And Gwinnett probably seems like the hinterlands for them, candidly. No disrespect to Gwinnett. Gwinnett's fantastic, and I think there's going to be some real good growth in the suburbs. I also think millennials are going to do what we boomers did. They're going to get married, and they're going to move out because they're going to want bigger homes. They're going to want nicer, better schools. They want a yard, a dog, so I think everybody wants something a little bit different. We have 2 buildings up in North Fulton, and they've been very successful for us. There are people who there's always going to be something for everybody. And the millennials, they're young, they top out at 35 right now. They will be moving to Gwinnett. The bus service, getting on a bus, then getting on a train, it's one extra step. It might be a little bit of a stretch, but look, there's everybody. I've been in business long enough to know that there's demand for the suburban stuff. There's demand for the stuff around the perimeter. There's demand for Midtown, downtown, Buckhead. Everybody wants something. There's demand for all categories and all locations and all submarkets. And I think in Atlanta, demand will increase in every submarket.
I have a question from a text from the crowd. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal that suggested that a lot of larger owners of commercial real estate are thinking it's time to sell, that maybe this is the top of the market. Opinion?
They got a good point. Yeah, we have sold some things that we held for 50 or 60 years. So we think that was a good moment in the last year or so. I don't think you sell everything if you want to be a developer, because if you want to own real estate, if you sell everything, then what do? You always got to remember that if you're selling and then trying to buy in the same market, you're going to be thrilled by the first transaction and disappointed by the second one. A certain amount of selling during the peak of the market is usually a wise idea.
Jim?
Yeah, with cap rates where they are, it's easy to make the argument that it's a good time to sell, and in the last year has been a good time to sell. So I agree with Larry. On the other hand, we have seen very limited new construction and new development on the office side. And so we've seen historically high positive rent growth. And if there are 2 things that drive value, it's cap rates and NOI. And so with increasing rental rates, obviously that increases value, right? So we are experiencing, last year we probably 5% rent growth in most of the submarkets of Atlanta. I think most of us who are paying close attention to the office sector expect that to tail off a little bit. We've had 4 or 5% rent growth for the last 3 years or so. Will we sustain 4 or 5%? Will we see rates rise 5% this year? I don't think quite that much. But I think we'll see rental rates grow 3%, 4%, a couple more years, and then maybe plateau. But it's all simple, supply and demand econ 101. If you don't have a lot of new supply, then and demand continues, and we continue to add 10 to 15,000 new office-absorbing jobs in Atlanta each of the next 3 years, then we're going to continue to see rent growth. So the rent growth is the counter effect that will drive values.
Is it time to build office in Atlanta now? Can you get the rents? Is it a good time?
Well, it's expensive to build. We have the two big stadiums that have driven up construction costs locally. As they finish, there's going to be more skilled labor, and if you talk to the big GCs around town, that's the real problem, was not a lot of skilled labor available, and that's one of the big reasons for the increase in construction costs. And we've seen construction costs increase considerably for the last 4, 5, 6 years with no end in sight. Hopefully, costs will level off a little bit. We'll have about $360 a foot in our Riverwood 300 building up in the Cumberland Galleria submarket. And if we started that building more than a year ago, if we were to start that today, we'd have over $400 a foot in it. And so, rates or construction costs, and Larry probably have a better sense of this, but, is it a good time? It probably is a good time. It's just very expensive and to develop office. And rates are just in some submarkets, they're getting close enough. There's still a gap between what you need in rental rate in the office sector to support the new construction costs. There's still a gap. The market is not quite there. Now, some tenants and prospects are willing to pay a premium to be in a brand new building. For whatever reason, they want to restack and get more efficient, or they'll pay a premium. They'll pay $5 more per square foot, and they'll have to do that in most of the submarkets because in order to justify the cost of new construction right now.
Okay, I have another quick question for each of you. Another question from the group. Yes, Wayne.
Rumor has it that this big construction project in Central Perimeter is causing a lot of anxiety with landlords, with tenant reps, and with tenants. And that when lease renewals are coming up or when you're looking for new space, there's the selling detriment or benefit to other areas with respect to the 285 and 400. How much of that is a real conversation that's going on out there?
Wayne, that is a great question. And
can you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question is the construction of I-285 and 400, the two lanes going east, west, north, and south, what kind of an impact is that having? Not only real impact, but just barely getting started, so it really hasn't had an impact yet. But what is the psychological impact of that on prospective tenants and landlords? And it's honestly, I have direct experience with that. Global Payments, one of our big tenants in one of our Glen Lake buildings, and the head of real estate's actually a good friend of mine. We had countless discussions about this, and they were very anxious about it. Buildings located at Glen Lake Parkway near Abernathy, and that was something that gave the CEO and the head of real estate great anxiety, because they didn't want their employees to be subjected to the interruptions and the traffic jams associated with all that construction. Ultimately, they decided to take their executives 3 floors out of our building and go down to 3 Alliance. And they left behind the worker bees. But my argument to those guys was, if you really study the engineering, Kim Lee Horn's the engineer, and the DOT plans, and I did because it's part of my job, you will really discover that all of this construction is going to be contained within the new lanes that are to be built. They are promising and pledging, and the design affords minimal interruption. It'll only be in the wee hours, the AM hours, and weekends occasionally when they have to interfere with the existing lanes. It's a fabulous plan, Wayne. What they're adding is collector-distributor lanes in each direction, and these lanes will limit the merging and exiting from the drive lanes. The existing lanes are all going to basically be through lanes. So what they're adding is 2 lanes in each direction, and the studies show that 85% or so of accidents occur merging and exiting. So what they're doing is they're basically going to have barrier walls up that are going to separate the existing lanes from the collector distributor lanes. It's going to be a huge improvement. You'll be able to get through central perimeter a lot easier. And the most important thing is, and I tell every for one of our central perimeter buildings, it's really not going to be a problem during construction. 4-year project or so, but Wayne, it's something that we have to overcome with all our prospects. They're very conscious of it. They're very concerned about it.
If you could leave us with a quick tip in 2 sentences, a tip for somebody involving our CCIMs here today. Landlord, tenant, investor, broker.
Go out into the world and be optimistic.
That's great. There are plenty of reasons to be optimistic, and I think we're so fortunate, all of us, to work in Atlanta, which is going to, for the next 4, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, be a fantastic place to work, live and work in the real estate business. If you're a tenant rep broker, set expectations properly early on in your discussions with your client. It is getting to be more difficult to lease space at favorable rates and terms, and it's getting tighter. So one of the mistakes I see among tenant rep brokers who we deal with a lot is unrealistic expectations. Give your client the bad news first, and then do your best and outperform for them.
Jim, Larry, thank you. Gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, Jim, and Larry, for a wonderful program today. Absolutely fantastic. Want to thank our sponsors again today. Don't forget to register for the Savannah program coming up. And don't forget to pick up your validated parking ticket. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Good job, Larry. Enjoyed it. So there's no demand for the little 50,000 infill old 15, 18 foot. Whereas for e-commerce, is it yes, that's what it is. Yeah. So those building collections, they'll be locally company. Yeah. And they'll pay for it. You probably sold a lot. Yeah. Well, that's what we did. We started selling that. First thing we did is we sold about 12 buildings. Thank you both. You're welcome. It's fun. Pleasure. Good stuff. Thank you. Larry, thank you. I'm intrigued by it. That was great. I enjoyed it. Appreciate it. Really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure. Yeah, thank you. Good to see you. Good to see you again after 35 years. We have free CCIM hat. Oh, that is very nice. Oh, yeah. CCIM hat. I can pretend I got the credentials. I like that.
Thank you so much. That's great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, how's it going?